This bird, which was his life, taken away from him, I thought was an unbelievable way of treating somebody who the RSPB ought to have regarded as a friend and an ally and a fellow bird lover.
There's nothing I can do about it. You know, it's happened. They've confiscated my falcons, so I've just got to accept it, really. I can't claim it back, sad to say.
Bird keepers claim that such cases are common, that the laws on bird keeping are so complex that if bodies like the RSPB decide to enforce them to the letter, they're constantly caught out.
I used to look after birds for the RSPB. I looked after sparrowhawks and peregrines for them, that they confiscated from various places. They didn't have any facilities for looking after them at all, you see, which rather surprised me, actually, and they asked me to look after them for them.
Nowadays, the Boone family can only watch their birds on an old home video. They're banned from keeping them. 3 years ago, as they were moving from Suffolk to Scotland, Mick Boone and a friend shared out a number of birds they owned jointly. In September 1988, Mick left these birds with his wife in Suffolk and went to build aviaries at their new home. The law says the new keeper has to register the birds. To do so, they use a form rather like a car logbook. The previous owner filled in and sent off the bottom part to say Mick was the new owner. But because there was a postal strike, this was stuck in the post, and Leslie Boone didn't send off the top part of the form.
The papers were telling me that the postal strike was still on, and I hadn't had any mail through the post, so I assumed, and I was asking at the post office next door, and the man there was telling me, no, it's not working properly at the moment. Don't post anything that needn't be posted right this second. So that's why I still had them.
What was your understanding of the urgency with which these documents, these registration documents, had to be posted?
Well, it says on the form, at the back, the piece you fill in at the back, the new keeper fills in, it says to be filled in and posted as soon as possible. And I take that to be that if there's a postal strike, it's not possible to post them.
It was agreed in court that there was only a 3-hour period during the 12-day period that my wife was keeping these birds when they could have been posted. But my wife was reading the newspaper, and the newspaper said the strike was on. I mean, the post office didn't ring my wife and say, it's okay, you can post these documents now. These are valuable documents. If they're lost, it can cause a lot of problems. And I can only say my wife did the best thing by keeping them to make sure that they weren't lost in the backlog of post.
The Boone's house was searched by the police and RSPB while 4 major sorting offices were still on strike. The Boones were each charged with 11 offences. 2 had to be heard by a jury. The prosecution offered no evidence and the charges were dismissed. A further 4 were dropped. On 2 others they were found not guilty. But for the remaining 3 they were fined a total of £2,200 with £2,000 costs and had birds worth more than £7,000 confiscated. The Boones still maintain their innocence, arguing that they had no reason to avoid registering their birds and that they were prevented from doing so only by the strike. But the most curious aspect of the case concerns what happened to the birds that were confiscated. Mick Boone's peregrine was initially given back to him when magistrates dismissed the charge relating to it.
There was no doubt about it, that was my peregrine. I knew him well, I'd flown him for a long, long time. But it was in disgusting condition. It was covered in muck. It'd been in the box, I don't know how long, it was covered in it. It had broken feathers.
An owl belonging to Mick's son was ordered to be handed back when that conviction was quashed on appeal.
It wasn't the same bird. It acted like a wild owl to me, and in fact that's what I think it was. It showed no signs of ever being in captivity to me.
Had a totally different shaped beak, like really pale colour, and you know, when Dad was holding it, it was totally ripping its hand to bits, and when I had the owl, it wouldn't do that to anybody. You could pick it up, stroke it, whatever.
Did you take any action against the RSPB over your allegations about the peregrine and the owl?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
No, what's the point? How can you fight an organisation like the RSPB? They're whiter than white.
My first comment, they would say that, wouldn't they? My second comment was that the RSPB makes sure that birds that it has to confiscate or the police have to confiscate, which are given to our care, are put in to the possession of somebody that knows how to look after birds. And so Mr. Boone's complaint is as much against that person is against the RSPB. Having said that, of course, we would take full responsibility for how a bird was returned, but I think you'll find that those birds were returned in very good condition.
But if in this case the RSPB denied that the birds they confiscated came to any harm, in another we investigated, there's no argument. The Society admits that more than 50 birds died after it took them. 10 years ago, John Quinn became famous briefly for rescuing an injured osprey. He often nursed injured birds, but he was also a bird keeper. After a search by the RSPB, he was convicted of illegal possession of birds and fined £250. He'd been found with young birds but no adults. John Quinn claimed that all his adult birds had been stolen, but his solicitor warned him that legal costs could be very high, and he pleaded guilty. The chairman of the magistrate said it was a pity the case had to be brought, as Mr. Quinn and the RSPB both seemed to have the same aims. The RSPB still has no doubts about Mr. Quinn's guilt, but one of the most disturbing aspects of the case is what happened to his birds. The RSPB confiscated 51, including redshanks, avocets and oyster catchers. Within 4 months of its taking them, Mr. Quinn was told the birds were all dead.
They were given to a very well-known wildlife park to look after, and the sad fact is that they died. I'm not certain, though, that the responsibility for that should be with the wildlife park concerned, because these things are incredibly difficult. I mean, avocets, ring plovers, oyster catchers, redshank have a highly specialised diet. Very, very difficult birds to be kept in captivity. You know, and bringing up young birds, because I'm talking about all these birds were young birds, is extremely difficult indeed. I think the responsibility for this must go back to Mr. Quinn, who had the birds in the first place.
But the fact remains, the birds in Mr. Quinn's custody, whether they were there legally or not, were doing all right. They were taken by the RSPB and they all died. Now, isn't this a case of securing the prosecution of Mr. Quinn being more important than the welfare of the birds concerned?
I think if you have a case as serious as that as Mr. Quinn, where you're dealing with birds like avocets, the emblem of the RSPB, and one of our rarer birds in Britain, you have a responsibility to confiscate those birds and not leave them with the person who has allegedly committed these very serious offences.
The case exposed one of the problems with the law, which says it's illegal to keep wild birds unless you can prove they were bred in captivity. Suppose Mr. Quinn were telling the truth, and his adult birds were stolen. What was he supposed to do with the young birds?
I don't know what he does in that situation, because I don't believe that that was the situation to arise. It's almost so hypothetical that I find it's impossible to put my mind around it.
It seems ridiculous that to keep within the law, when I lost the parent birds, I would have to actually go and kill those young, because it was, under the new Wildlife and Countryside Act, 81, it's illegal to have the birds if you can't prove where they come from. If I'd have passed them